Welcome to the Big Book Roundtable and the RICO 12 family of recovery resources targeted at people from all backgrounds, faiths, and places dealing with addictions of all varieties. RICO 12 is also a resource for the loved ones of addicts. I am Justin B., a child of an all-powerful and all-loving God, and a member of many fellowships. And I'm living in miraculous recovery, and I'm blessed to be the moderator of this roundtable. Today, I'm joined by David G., Nikki M., and Ashley S., and we're excited to be here and read and swim through the big book with you. Now, I'm going to invite each of these individuals to introduce themselves, and I'm going to ask them a little question. Nikki, please introduce yourself and let us know a little bit of bad advice you've been given in your life.
Hi, I'm Nikki M., and I'm just a intelligent agent spearhead of God's ever-advancing creation. And the worst advice I've ever gotten is, there's two parts to it. It's like, get over it, Nikki. Well, I can't. And the other one was like, why don't you get under someone to get over him, Nikki? Now, I tried that advice and it did not work. So these were awful, awful suggestions, advice, and that is not in the book.
Thanks, Nikki, for sharing that. Love it. All right, Ashley, your turn to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about some of the worst advice you've ever been given.
Hey, everyone. I'm Ashley S. from North Carolina, recovered sex addict and codependent, grateful member of AAA, All Addicts Anonymous, and Al-Anon. I'm not sure if I can think of the worst, but a piece of advice I wouldn't take again is when I first got into an S fellowship, there was a recovery manual that was about 180 pages. I was told, read that manual once, then when you do it, read it again, and then you can work the steps. And I also had a sponsor who said, forget that, just work the steps with me. But I wasn't listening to her advice. So needless to say, I wasted a lot of time reading that recovery manual, not going with what's in the book. So that would be my advice for future people who are still trying to, just get started in the fellowship, is go with the big book.
Thank you, Ashley. Appreciate that. David, you're up to introduce yourself, and same question.
Right on. Thank you so much, Justin, for your service as always. I'm David G. I'm an alcoholic and addict of many sorts from Oklahoma. Grateful for a recovery date of August 8th, 1994. The worst advice that I was ever given in my life, I feel, don't drink and go to meetings and you'll be okay. I about died from that. So definitely the worst advice ever. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, David, Nikki, Ashley, happy to have you here. I think the worst piece of advice, or one of the worst pieces of advice I was ever given, was you be you, because untreated me is a disaster. I'm a tornado ripping through the lives of everybody, and that doesn't work. So if anybody just says, hey, Justin, you be you, I got to step away and say, no, I'm not going to be me. I've destroyed enough lives with that. All right. Excited to have you all here. Excited to have the listeners here. Everybody get your big books out, get pen, paper, highlighter, pencil, whatever you do to mark things up, and get ready to take notes, because we're going to be jumping back into the foreword to the second edition of the big book. Today we'll be starting on page xviii, that's Roman numeral 18, at the bottom of the page where it starts with our society then entered. And we will be ending at the bottom of page Roman numeral 19, that's XIX, ending in the paragraph that ends in great assets that our society has. So I'm going to get into reading now, and we will have our comments after this. Our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this: could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership, and money? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Soon, AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. As we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society, that our leaders might serve but never govern, that each group was to be autonomous and that there was to be no professional class of therapy. There were to be no fees or dues. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. There was to be the least possible organization, even in our service centers. Our public relations were to be based upon attraction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and films. And in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter public controversies. This was the substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in full on page 561 of this book. Though none of these principles had the force of rules or laws, they had become so widely accepted by 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international conference held at Cleveland. Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has. All right, there's a lot of good stuff in there, the introduction of the 12 traditions, and I love several of the lines that were brought in here. And this follows up really well on the previous period, which was, we're jumping into the adolescent period. In our last episode, we talked about the pioneering period. And before that, it was the flying blind period. But let's jump in here and talk experience, strength, and hope from each of you. Nikki, why don't you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on what we read, your experience, strength, and hope there?
Well, again, hi, I'm Nikki M, and I'm experiencing all this right now. You know, the adolescence period, which is the growing pains in a fellowship that God inspired me to. What happened is my home group wouldn't let me use a big book. That's what happened. And I went to the business meetings. I went to all the organizational things that they say least possible that we should be doing. And it was one of these, like, if you've ever been to a business meeting in Al-Anon or CODA or even SLAA, it's like, I don't even know. These are the things I avoided. So I said, okay, fine. I'll go create my own fellowship and create my own meeting. And that happened. But would there be quarrels over leadership and money? I put a big yes. Are there striving for power and prestige? Yes, a lot of that's mine because it's like, this is my baby. No, it's not, Nikki, it's God's. Is there schisms? Yep. And then I love this. We have to hang together or die separately. Thank God I have a program. Thank God my sponsees like literally shook me awake because I could really step on the toes, not only of some people, but of all people. You said it, Justin, a tornado. So I have to unify the fellowship or pass on. I have to pass off the scene. And so to be honest, as I'm going through all these things and I'm reading it, that's what's happening to me. It's like, page 96, move on. If people don't understand me, I've done it once. We can do it again with anything is possible with God. See, I tapped the source of power. I'm armed with the facts. So I love this too. Least possible organization. That's what happened in the fellowship that I loved. We never had a business meeting. All of a sudden you get more people and they want to do things differently. I either accept it or I die. This is really serious stuff because, Justin, you and I spoke about it a while ago. I was in dark, deep pain over this. And so I had to really, what does it say? It doesn't say what's my part. It says, where am I at fault? Where am I to blame? Well, how about this, Nikki? Leaders should serve, never govern. My line out says, guilty. Guilty as charged. So I'm just grateful that I'm reading this. It's like, I'm living this right now. So I need to focus on the principles of the program. And the first one that we always work on the people that I sponsor and from my lineage, if you want to call it that, is humility. It's a big step 7. Like, Nikki, shh, you know nothing. I love you guys. Thanks for getting me.
Thanks for sharing that and being vulnerable about that, Nikki. That's good stuff. I appreciate that. Ashley, what are some of the things that you, as you read through this, that you have some experience, strength, and hope that you'd like to share with us about?
Thank you, Justin and Nikki and David, for your service. Some of the things that jumped out to me is kind of what Nikki touched on was I need to ask myself that question. Am I striving for power, for money? Because I come in here, I'm power hungry. I'm trying to fill that with false power. For me, it was sex or the guy, whatever, fill in your addiction. But I need, a higher power. I need God. And, it kind of talks about that on the next page. We either hang together or die separately. So unity here is key. And it says it again at the very bottom of the page. today the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has. And it's only one of the assets. There's two others. So that would be service and recovery. And I think it hits on that perfectly right here in the middle of the page as it kind of dives into the traditions. So if I could talk about my experience with just one of these, it says it was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society. And I definitely have experience with this. I came into an S fellowship and acted out with somebody. Couldn't, get many days just in there, and I had already acted out with somebody in the fellowship. Clearly, that's my fault, my part to blame. But they wanted to not just exclude me from the one meeting that I was in, but the whole entire city that I lived in. And so, I didn't know anything about the traditions and came to learn, you can be removed from a group, but not from AA as a whole or whatever fellowship you're in. But I love how each of these sentences, they touch on one of the traditions, that our leaders might serve, never govern. Tradition 2. That's actually something I put into practice, and I pray before I pick up the phone with a sponsee or I chair a meeting. I want to make sure that I'm coming into it with a spirit of service rather than leadership or power. That each group ought to be autonomous. Tradition 4, that there's no expenses, it's just by voluntary contributions. Tradition 7, least possible organization, even in our service centers. Tradition 9, attraction rather than promotion. 11, and enter no public controversies. Tradition 10. So I love how it's got all of it in here. It does that in the book a lot of times where it points out different steps, but this is really the main part of the book where it talks about the traditions. And so just to plug that David and I are doing a traditions workshop, as Nikki mentioned in another episode. And so I hope that somebody will join us, and so we can really start to dig into these even more than we're doing right now in this episode. So thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate you talking a little bit more about the traditions there. I think they're a lot more powerful than I give them credit for, than I realize. All right, David, excited to hear your take and your takeaway from what we read here. What's some experience, strength, and hope that you have to share with us here?
Well, I think a great deal of it has already been covered and copied. And I love it says, as we discovered the principles. See, that's something that I discovered as time went on. I really didn't understand it so much in the beginning, but as I discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, that's the 12 steps. So we had to involve the principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. That's the 12 traditions. And so, it's been said many times in our fellowship, the steps keep me from committing suicide and the traditions keep me from committing homicide. And it says it was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society. I talked about it last night in Tradition 3 in our workshop. There was a time that I was asked to leave a meeting because of the behaviors that I was engaging in at the time, which weren't very healthy. And I was doing that from a place of sober. And, what I see today is if you ask somebody to leave a fellowship for bad behavior, it doesn't mean you can't come back when your behavior changes. It just needs to change. And so that's why it says, our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. I'm here to serve the fellowship today, not govern over it. And the only way that I know about that is I have violated that tradition over and over through the years. Somebody said to me just recently, David, the problem is you need to stay small in AA or whatever fellowship you're in. You always want to get big. You want to be the man. You want to do this. You need to learn how to stay small. So the word autonomous, if you look that up, it really means that I have the right to do what I want to do. And you put a group of people together that do that. And that really kind of excludes us from other groups coming in and telling us how to run our fellowship or our particular meeting. So each group was to be autonomous, except in matters, that would affect other groups or whatever fellowship as a whole. so, if I come in and you don't like the fact that we're asking you not to be on your cell phone during one of our meetings, and you say that's nowhere in our traditions, well, we're absolutely covered by tradition 4, because as a group, we've already met. We've already discussed this in a group conscience. We don't need your approval. Put the phone away. And that's kind of how it is. And so, there are so many things I could go into experience and after experience. We had a guy that was a professional counselor, and he came into our meetings, and what he would want to do is take notes of the people who really had good things to say and take it back and apply it to his sessions. And a lot of people would bring that stuff back to the meetings, and we just shut them down. We told them right here, in tradition 8, there was to be no professional class of therapy here. If your problem is therapeutic, then I 110% encourage you to get a therapist. I do. But if your problem is spiritual, like mine, you might want to get your nose in the middle of this book and do what it says to have an experience beyond a mental experience. And so this is just some of the things as I read this. God, we love the limelight. As alcoholics and addicts, we just do. Public relations is based on attraction rather than promotion. You always wanted to try to promote myself. Hey, I've got this speaking event going on. Check this flyer out. Pass this around to all your people. I don't need to do any of that today. I have learned so much through these traditions by breaking these traditions that today I have a good, solid foundation. And you read it there. They're stated in full on 561 of the book. And though none of the principles, now there's 36 spiritual principles which by to recover. There's not only 12. These principles had the force of rules or laws that they become so widely accepted by 1950, they were confirmed at the first international conference at Cleveland. And if you Google the first international conference at Cleveland, you will see that Bill Wilson had this into works way before Dr. Bob would ever agree to it. He was like, this ain't going to turn out well. I just know it isn't. And it wasn't until many years later that he finally decided, right before he passed, and he gave in to the traditions. They were accepted here at Cleveland. There's an incredible amount of history behind all of this if you just take time to read it. So thank you for calling on me to share. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks, David. I appreciate that. This little section here where the traditions are developed and shared a little bit about and everything is like you said, there's a lot of history behind that, and we aren't going to be able to deep dive into that here. That's not what this podcast is about. But man, there's some good stuff that was shared here today. What I'd like to do is ask a question of each of you here based on what you shared. Nikki, you talked a little bit, you were pretty vulnerable in sharing, hey, you were kind of woken up by some sponsees that you had and said, hey, and you had lined out guilty on some of these things. Tell us a little bit more about the lessons you're learning as you are going through this process right now of realizing these things and trying to put them into practice.
Thank you, Justin. That's a real powerful question because there's so many lessons. And, I just love everyone at this table because one lesson is that just be quiet and wait. And then you'll be on a podcast with David G and Ashley S, and they'll speak the truth. So I hope anybody who thought I wasn't, they'll hear it. I'm armed with the facts, but what have I learned is literally that God will do for me what I cannot do for myself. I love this where it says, be excluded. Well, we're all on modern technology right now on WhatsApp. Someone can just mute you. Someone could make you not admin. Someone can actually silence you in your own group. And when that happened, the next day, these podcasts were coming out. So I can't be too silenced because here we are recorded. So I started seeing miracles come true. I love what David said about no dues or fees. I was really, struggling with that in some things in our fellowship. And it's like, if it's not in the book, why are we doing it? So what are my lessons is that God will vindicate me. God will speak for me. I need to keep my mouth shut moving forward. I need to be more responsible. I was relying on human aid because I think our last podcast, David had a wish and he said that he wanted technology. I was so afraid, closed-minded, not willing to learn technology that my reliance on human aid got me into this situation. You understand? Like, I'm saying I'm completely at fault. I was irresponsible. I was lazy. I refused to look how to use technology. I relied on human aids. I didn't trust God in the process. So when I look at all these things, I'm just so grateful because I'm honest and open-minded and willing enough to know that I'm completely at fault for all of this. I made decisions not yesterday, but years ago based on self, living in fear, not willing to learn technology, rely on someone else. So I'm just grateful because there's such big stuff coming. That's the other miracle, is I just get course corrected. I pass off the scene to those who are more than capable of taking care of things. And I focus on what God has next for me.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki. I appreciate the insight there and your share about that. Ashley, you talked about being kicked out of a fellowship because of the traditions. Well, not because of the traditions, but because of actions within that. You talked about being kind of going. What happened with people going over the line with the traditions? Tell us a little bit about this next situation. I think we've all been in a group where somebody comes in and they kind of throw off the vibe and they kind of don't fit in. But how do we as a fellowship include those people while still protecting the fellowship using the traditions and that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Thank you, Justin. That's a great question. So the question was, how do we include people without basically being dictators? Or can you kind of rephrase your question for me?
Yeah. So if somebody's coming in and kind of not understanding how things work and they're kind of dominating in certain areas, maybe breaking rules that are happening, how do we bring them in, include them without making them the more important thing, the fellowship being the more important of it?
It's a great question. The perfect example just came into my head. So I chaired a meeting probably about a month or so ago. And this is a very structured meeting. They have, group conscious has certain rules. You have to have been through the highness format process of the Big Book in order to share at this meeting. And as chair, it's part of my responsibility, to make sure that people qualify themselves at the beginning of their share. And it was pretty clear to me that there was one gentleman who came on the meeting and he kind of just wanted to share because he had 20 some years in the program and thought that he was qualified. And I just gently reminded him, in order to speak at this meeting, these are our requirements. And, it's not on me to shut somebody down and be forceful and say, look, you can't speak here, because there was a lesson that he needed to learn. And I can't enable people. And, as much as I want to try and be a perfectionist and make the meeting run smoothly, there's just going to be some times where I can only go so far and God has to work in that situation. So I think I hope that answers your question. But that's kind of the experience that came to mind for me. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Ashley. And I had a hard time wording that question. You did a great job answering it. I really appreciate it. David, question for you. The opening of one of the paragraphs we read, as we discovered the principles by which individual alcoholic could live. You mentioned about discovering those principles. What are some principles that you are discovering today in your walk in, almost 29 years in program that is still, more will be revealed. My eyes are still being opened. Tell us a little bit about a principle you're discovering right now.
Well, I think the biggest one for me is humility, because, I have always had that reputation of shutting somebody down or shutting someone up. And that was just something that as time went on, I just didn't like that anymore. I didn't like that part of me. I didn't want to be the mouthpiece, for Alcoholics Anonymous anymore. So humility has been a very big one for me. And, I keep getting opportunities to practice that. But I tell you, the greatest discovery for me was the discovery of self being, what manifests in various ways is what had defeated me. See, I didn't realize that for so long. And, I just thought it was this or that, or it was this situation or that. I really never took it what was underlying that. And so once I seen that, then I was able to take the principle of self-searching, and I was able to go into that third column and do some pretty extensive work. It was okay for me to look at pride and how it had affected me, self-esteem, this and that. But the bigger question became, what does my behavior look like if you threaten my self-esteem or my pride? How do I behave? What do I do? Well, I either attack, I bully, I isolate, I go into regret. And so as I see all of these things, I really discovered that the principle of self-searching, and then the next one, of course, would be confession. I really began to discover a freedom in that unlike I ever had. And that's very humbling for me to accept that. So I would think the biggest principle that I have discovered and continue to discover through the years, and trust me, I just don't wake up thinking, oh, I'm going to be all humble today. Life presents a problem or a situation that allows me to be that way. So humility would be the ongoing one for me. It overcomes pride every time whenever I'm willing to turn to the power and turn from self and bathe in the sunlight. So thank you, Justin.
Man, thank you, David. I have really enjoyed this conversation. We get in and we read some paragraphs from the Big Book. We have some insights that come to us through that reading. And then there's been some vulnerability and some real stuff shared. I really appreciate that. Helps me connect with you, helps me connect with God. And I hope it helps others connect with God and fellowship and just recovery here. Thank you for sharing all those things. Let's do some wrap-up questions here. Just basically, what was your takeaway and 60 seconds of what you're going to do to apply these things into your life. Let's start with Nikki. Nikki, tell us a little bit about your takeaway from today's learnings and how you can apply that in your life today.
Well, I don't feel so alone. That's my takeaway. It sounds like people can't see this, but I'm staring at 3 children of God and a 4th right here. And I'm not alone. Like what Ashley shared, what David shared, what you're sharing, I'm not alone in this thing called life. And I'm just grateful. That's my takeaway, is that I'm not alone. It's not, I am you, you are me. Deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. And for me and David, humility.
Thank you, Nikki. All right, Ashley, same question for you. What's your takeaway today?
Thank you, Justin and Nikki and David. So glad to be here with y'all tonight. I think my takeaway, I was just reminded reading, like I was saying in an earlier podcast, once the words come out of your mouth, you're kind of reminded of things that really God could use. One of the darkest times in my life where I had been kicked out, air quotes, kicked out, and turned that around to the very next day. That was the day that I discovered the Big Book, and that somebody passed me along recordings of a man who was doing a study of the Big Book. And that's the person I'm sitting across from today. So it's amazing how God used something that I just thought I'm never going to be able to recover or get out of this situation to now help so many others through that. So I'm just so grateful. Thank you.
I love God's timing. It's good stuff. That's probably going to be my takeaway. We'll see here. David, you're up though. Tell us a little bit about your takeaway.
Well, I just take away from this, as always, a lot of gratitude for these ladies and yourself, Justin. But I think the biggest thing that I take away is continued freedom here, is that we will continue to live free. And it doesn't mean that trouble's not going to come and dark times aren't going to show up. But I guarantee you we have the tools and we have the strength of each other to overcome any of that, because God is found in all of that for me. So thank you, Justin.
Thank you, David. Everybody, thank you. And my takeaway is God's timing. In those darkest hours, in those times when it's like, are you serious, God? Really? All of a sudden, the light comes on somewhere and I turn and look and there's a solution. And what a beautiful thing that is. Thank you each for being here. Ashley, Nikki, David, good stuff. And thank you all, our listening audience, for joining with us. To learn more about RICO 12 and what we're doing and how you can support these projects, go to rico12.com. To learn more about any of the other projects that Ashley, David, and Nikki discussed and are working on, check out the links in the show notes of the podcast and get into the work and experience the miracles of recovery. God's timing is perfect. If you just tuned in here thinking that you're the bottom of the bottom, maybe just got kicked out of a fellowship, jump right back in. Find it, because you're not alone. Join us in the fellowship of the Spirit. Come trudge this adventurous and amazing road of happy destiny with us. Work it. You are worth it.